I know it's not new, but it was new to me. So thank you for choosing to be part of this spiritual community today. Thank you for being here with us in the room or out in Zoom YouTube land. The community is way beyond what's in these walls. And if you think about it, you know that. And we get to remember that and remember to be in that space and act that way. So today, I get to continue the exploration of what it means to be curious as a spiritual practice and how we look at the things in our lives that happen that may leave us with not exactly a fabulous feeling, like maybe anxiety or worry or angst or irritation or trouble. How do we get curious about those experiences and see them as something for our good rather than something that's a problem? That's a really big question, right? Is there anybody in the room who has never had trouble, angst, worry, irritation, annoyance, aggravation, something gone wrong? I didn't think so. Yeah, today, this week, this morning. Yeah, this week I got to buy a new washer, okay? So I'm with you, right? So what do we do about these troublesome things? How do we live? How do we engage in dealing with life as it is and see it as spiritual practice? Boy, that's a beast of a question. So what do? Do you ignore it? Do you pretend like you're two and you're playing peekaboo? It's like, I don't see you, you don't exist. Like you did when you were two? Do you fixate on it until it assumes the stature of the biggest, most horrible, ugly monster you've ever imagined that's hiding in your closet or under the bed? Is that a spiritual practice? Or do you manage to mostly keep it in perspective? Not too big, not too small, but just right? Or do you see it as an opportunity for stepping in to your spiritual adulthood? Every single one of those choices is something that I bet every single one of us has done. And the question is, what's your go-to? And my challenge or encouragement today is to look at, if your go-to is not using it for your benefit, for your growth, for your expansion, to try to turn your attention in that direction. It's not easy when your washer breaks with a load of wet laundry in it. And it is within our capability to do that, because each one of us has all the tools we need already to be able to go, wow, isn't this interesting? What do I do now? So I came across a blog post written yesterday by an 85-year-old psychotherapist named Diana DeVay. She was writing about 2 power tools that she used to use routinely in her psychotherapy practice. And she now recognizes that she uses them every single day in her life. And, just for giggles and grins, she's lost 95% of her vision in the last 5 years. Man. So she's gotten practice at dealing with radical change. And she's continuing to learn how to come to terms with it. Her power tools: complete attention with deep listening, being present in the conversation, not present to argue or present to respond, but actually present to listen. That's a hard one, right? It's like, well, I have something to tell you. You need to hear my story. Like, what's going on? Wow. that's really hard, that really sucks. Or, wow, that's tremendous. Without having to rebut or educate or encourage or whatever. To be present and present, centered, whole, listening. That right there is a spiritual practice that all of us probably will be working on our whole life, because there are so many distractions in our world. I wrote, I think it was this last week in the newsletter, maybe it was the week before, about recognizing how easy my brain takes me away from the present moment. Even if it's just a thought I had yesterday and it came back. And I'm doing this stupid brain game, right, on the computer, and you've got to be fast and accurate and stuff. And I suddenly realize I've missed the last 3 because I was thinking about yesterday. Am I present? Can I pull myself back? Every single one of us works on this and gets to work on it constantly. It's part of the package of being human in the present day. So, her second power tool, Diana DeVay's second power tool, is curiosity instead of judgment. This is a big, fat, hairy deal. She wrote, "Curiosity is the alternative to judgment. The fastest way to feel unsafe is to feel that we are being judged, graded, given an A or an F in life. How horrible. But when we are curious instead, we show interest and caring, whether it's the people woven into our daily life or those we encounter only for a moment." She continues, "I believe that connection is the consequence of curiosity. Given the realities of geographically dispersed families, we may need to find new venues for connection. An intentional space for deep listening, combined with curiosity and caring, can become the energetic center for our future explorations. We need companions for the road. We need companions for the road. Perhaps they will be found in new listening partnerships, peer counseling arrangements, or in a support group. Can we be present? Can we be engaged and interactive and participative with the person sitting in front of us or even in the Zoom room? Can we be present with them and curious instead of going, well, that's just the stupidest thing I ever heard? How many of us do that all the time? How easy it is to fall into judgment instead of to say, I don't really know what I'm looking at. Tell me more. I don't understand what you're telling me. I haven't quite heard you yet. Keep talking. Wow. Curiosity, compassionate, attentive listening, power tools available to all of us if we choose to take them on. And every single one of us knows what the experience is like to actually be in a conversation with someone who is actively listening to us, right? It is among the most fabulous things in the world. Because they're actually listening. And it's remarkable. And every single one of us can do that. But what does it take for you to ignore the persistent distractions, the pinging of the phone, the thought of yesterday, the to-do list that goes on forever, the desires of what you'd really rather be doing, to be present in the conversation in this moment of now and engaged in the activity you're engaged in and not elsewhere. And the second part, what about being curious instead of what we all default to believing is already true? Well, those people, I mean, they know better, or they should. Who doesn't do that? Can we be curious? Can we say, I don't understand. Tell me more. Judgment's such a lazy way of being. And ultimately, it's ineffective because we don't actually engage. We don't actually learn. We don't actually explore. We don't actually experience because we're living in our old stories, right? So how do we get curious? And how do we get curious about the hard stuff? The broken washing machines. The mail that doesn't get delivered. How do we get curious about those things? And not battle them, not avoid them, not pretend they don't exist. In the story that Dr. Holmes loved, The Prodigal Son, he loved it enough to devote 10 pages of the textbook to the story, which is like crazy for him. But he talked about the wayward son waking up in the far country, hungry, miserable, cold, probably, homesick, destitute, waking up and realizing that even the hired servants at home had it better than him. He came to his senses. He became present. And when he became present and realized he could go home, and his father maybe would take him in, like a servant, and his father, of course, was waiting with open arms. But even his older brother who stayed home, he was so far into judgment, he wasn't present either. Both of them were missing the point because they weren't present in their lives. They weren't curious. They had already decided what was so. The son who was hanging out with the pigs had a chance to figure out a different way of seeing his world, and he took it as far as we know. The other one, it's even odds whether he did or not. And we have that choice all the time. So I am not saying that we choose to have hard things happen. That would be dumb. And we don't choose it, most of us, or we don't consciously choose it. But sometimes we choose things and we don't see the consequences of them until they land on our heads. And sometimes stuff just happens. It does. And regardless of what story is there, we always have the chance to say, okay, I don't like this. What do I do with it? And we get to choose to engage with what happens in our lives. We get to choose how we deal. I came across a TEDx talk yesterday by a dude named Charles Hunt from 2016. It'll make the newsletter at some point. He was a kid raised in the Oakland projects. And he had absolutely no positive role models. None. In fact, he had negative role models. And he eventually ended up with a grandma who raised him. So he's standing on the TEDx stage in Charlotte. And he's talking about the impact of trauma on resilience. And he said, what if I told you that you could overcome anything? That there isn't a circumstance or a situation known to humanity that you can't overcome. That you are indeed unbreakable. Would you believe me? More important than me telling you that, if you told yourself these things, would you believe yourself? What was his method? You're not going to believe it, right? Realizing he had control over his mind and the way he perceived his present-day experiences. Here's what he said. See if any of this is familiar to you. The idea is to understand your beliefs. Your belief system impacts your feelings impact how you think about things, and your thought ultimately impacts how you act and respond. Familiar, right? Dr. Holmes wrote on 365 Science of Mind, page 180, no matter what the negations of yesterday might have been, the affirmations of today rise triumphant and transcendent over them. If we behold beauty instead of ugliness, then beauty will appear. If we persist in seeing the true rather than the false, then that which is true will appear. Let us then cease weeping over the shortcomings and mistakes and evils of our yesterdays and steadfastly hold the face of the great and divine reality. Let us resolve to walk in the light, wherein there is no darkness. Does that mean we go all Pollyanna and pretend like stuff doesn't happen? It does mean we don't wallow in our history. We don't get stuck in our story, and we make sure we use it and make sure we learn from it. And we remember what we're in control of, which is how we think and how we perceive our experiences. Just like Charles Hunt used his mind to be the first in his family to create a positive life experience and to help other people do the same. We have that option. We have that ability to do that and somehow see our life experiences for good, for our awakening, for our increased awareness, for our, dare I say, transformation. Science of Mind is not the only philosophy that says this. Science of Mind, as you know, is based on the golden thread that's found in all religions, all philosophies, all belief systems that work. Holmes read everything he could get his hands on. He was particularly fond of what I like to call the dead Greek guys, the ancient Greek philosophers. He was particularly fond of them, and I think he probably had a photographic memory, I don't know. But he applied what made sense to him, and that's what he wrote down. That's the basis of this teaching. So our friends the Stoics held this same perspective. Marcus Aurelius, one of the good emperors, wrote in his journal. He didn't write it for publication. He wrote it for himself. The book is now published as Meditations, but they were notes he wrote to himself, things he wanted to remember. He wrote, clear your mind, get a hold of yourself. When you wake up from sleep, realize it was only a bad dream that's upsetting you. When you wake up, see that what's there is just like those dreams. And Marcus Aurelius was kind of like he enjoyed reading an even older dead Greek guy named Heraclitus. Heraclitus was a pre-Socratic philosopher who lived 700 years before Marcus did. And Heraclitus wrote, for to be wise is one thing, to fix our attention on our intelligence, which guides everything else. And modern-day Stoic, Ryan Holiday, who writes lots of stuff about Stoicism, but he has a book called The Daily Stoic. He took Heraclitus's words and he riffed on them. And he wrote, living is making sure your mind is in charge, not your emotions, not your immediate physical sensations, and not your surging hormones. How many of us remember that we have a choice between, I have to, and it's really not us choosing. It's us reacting to hormones, physical sensations. Never mind. We have the choice. We have the choice to not get carried away by all these other physiological factors and then wonder, why did I do that? What was I thinking? Well, you weren't. I wasn't. And then another source. Probably Holmes didn't read this because it wasn't translated yet. but it's from the treasury of the eye of true teaching, classical stories, discourses, and poems of the Chan tradition, written by a dude named, I'm guessing it was a dude, Dahui, translated by Thomas Cleary. If you want to be able to understand easily, just know before sound and form, then you won't be confused by myriad objects, naturally unveiled, naturally unaffected. Spend your life before sound and form. Holmes would say, before effect, and you will be free. You will be like a mass of fire, which burns anything it touches. And then what more concern will you possibly have? I love that. Every single one of us has the power of that divine fire running through our veins. It is our birthright. It is our inheritance. And when we remember to stay in our center, to stay curious and non-judgmental, to stay present, life can happen for us. We can experience it and see what gifts it brings. So I want to close with a poem that you've heard me say before. It's by Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks. It's called The Guest House. This human being is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, emptying it of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from the beyond. It's a tall order, and yet it's within our skill set for every single one of us. We get to practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. Do that. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I'm going to speak the affirmative prayer. If I've said something useful to you, put it in your mind and hold it while I speak the words. I celebrate this day. I celebrate this opportunity to gather and remember and know. I celebrate this opportunity to remember that I am not the victim of my experience, and neither is anyone else. All beings have within themselves this gift already given, this opportunity to choose how to be, how to act, how to think, how to engage. And remember that life is for them. Not in this instant necessarily, but for their awakening, for their growth and development, exploration and expansion, because each one already is on this path, this way of being whole, complete, and perfect in the world. And even though each one will forget, including me, every single one of us gets to redo, step up, do over, try again. Because life is infinity. Life is eternal. And each one of us is on this quest for experiencing our God self as us and sharing that with each and all. So I celebrate this opportunity to gather and know and remember and see and practice. And I celebrate each of my co-travelers who join me in this practice, whether they're aware of it or not. Feeling great gratitude for this knowing this awareness. I take a breath. I relax, allow, and let it be. And so it is.